Orrin Hatch, who many of us were fortunate to work with for many, many years. He had a tremendous impact on the United States Senate and, in turn, on America. Barbara and I first want to express our condolences to his wife, Elaine, their 6 children, their families, and all those who mourn the passing of this outstanding public servant and humble servant of the Lord. Senator Hatch's funeral will be this Friday. In December of 2018, as his incredible 42 years in the United States Senate were drawing to a close, Orrin Hatch delivered the usual farewell address of retiring members here on the Senate floor. Concerned about the direction that he had seen this institution take in recent years, he said, quote, "We must restore the culture of compromise, and mutual respect that used to exist here and still does to some extent. In some respects," end of quote. He also said, and this is a shorter quote, "We must not be enemies, but friends." In his farewell address and in the quotes that I just read, Orrin's commitment to mutual respect and integrity is made very, very clear. It's also a charge to us to honor his memory by taking his words to heart as we go about our work here and what we do across the country. During Orrin's career, he served as chairman of the Finance Committee, the Judiciary Committee, and President Pro Tem of the United States Senate, and I've had the honor to do those same 3 things. The Finance Committee and the Judiciary Committee are powerful committees that deal with matters of broad importance to America. Decisions are made there that directly affect the lives of all Americans. Many times, dearly held beliefs and principles held by different senators come into conflict during long hours of work on important legislation or high-level cabinet and judicial nominations. Many of the tributes to Orrin have already made an observation which I share from our decades of work together at the negotiating table. Orrin was an unflinching, dyed-in-the-wool statesman who stayed true to his values and his convictions and financed disagreements with the spirit of collegiality. He always remembered that he was working with friends and not enemies. And he always remembered why he was in the United States Senate, to represent the great people of Utah. Orrin's ability to disagree without being disagreeable is evident from his incredible level of productivity. According to the Orrin G. Hatch Foundation, when he retired, he had passed more legislation into law than any living senator and sponsored or co-sponsored more than 750 bills that were enacted into law. As anyone who has spent any length of time in the Senate knows very well, getting legislation enacted into law, especially any enduring legislation, requires the ability to develop relationships and build trust with members of both parties. To be productive over the long term, those relationships need to be able to withstand the unproductive partisanship that tends to dominate the fleeting issues of the day. Some of Orrin's most significant legislative accomplishments highlight his ability to work across the aisle. A prime example is the Drug Price Competition and Patent Term Restoration Act, also known as Hatch-Waxman. stemming from his work with longtime Democrat Congressman Henry Waxman. Another important piece of legislation is the state children's health insurance program, on which he worked with the late Senator Ted Kennedy. Orrin regularly talked about working with his good friend, Senator Kennedy. For many years, Orrin Hatch and Ted Kennedy appeared to be complete opposites. They couldn't imagine those two senators with very different views could even work together, much less be friends. People that say that don't understand how the Senate works. Orrin's spirit of bipartisanship didn't come at the expense of his principles. Whether he was criticized for compromising with Democrats or for not compromising enough, Orrin stuck with what he believed was the right thing to do. As chairman of the Finance Committee during consideration of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, Orrin took the lead in drafting the most important tax reform legislation to be enacted in more than 30 years. When staff would discuss provisions to be included in the legislation, Orrin would repeatedly ask what the tax policy was. This was always his primary concern, not what was most politically expedient policy or the best policy to win re-election. Orrin wanted to get the details right, and the rest of his decision flowed from that perspective, and I know because I worked with him for decades on that committee, and particularly during that legislation. Despite the criticism he would get from all sides, Orrin would never let that drive him off course from sticking with his values and from being civil with his colleagues. In his office, Orrin had a statue of a red-tailed hawk that staff had given to him. He had a plaque on that staff that said, "Tough old bird." He adopted that phrase to describe himself to reporters and many who met him in his office. His tough old bird status was fully evident one late night during Finance Committee consideration of that tax bill I've referred to, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, when Republicans were accused of only being interested in looking out for the very rich. Orrin forcefully noted his own very humble beginnings. He shared how he had worked his whole career for, quote unquote, people who don't have a chance. Another principle Orrin shared with me is the importance of our staff. To be effective day in and day out, and to sift through the avalanche of information that comes into every senator's office, good staff are vital, particularly when a senator has served for a lengthy period of time. Staff are important to preserve the institutional memory of a committee. From years of around-the-clock work, they become really a second family. They may not share blood ties, but they share loyalty and share service to dig down into the trenches when policymaking and politics becomes a blood sport. So having longevity and a cohesion within a staff is very, very important. A tradition that I believe was unique to the Hatch office. Hatch office was the election of a Pioneer Day king and queen, people within that office. Now, Pioneer Day is a Utah state holiday that celebrates the entry of the first Mormon pioneers into Salt Lake Valley on July 24th, 1847. To recognize that holiday, everyone working for Senator Hatch, whether in his personal office or on a committee he chaired, would vote for a king and queen from a slate of candidates from within that office. At a lunch attended by the whole office, Orrin would announce the winners and crown the king and queen. The coronation was a salute to their service to the people of Utah, whose endearing pioneer spirit rings true this very day. Outside of ensuring his office was a place that good staff would want to work in, Orrin was no aloof boss. His sincerity shined through with me and his Senate colleagues, and then, of course, with his staff. He wanted to know what was happening in his staff's lives and made sure to say that he appreciated their advice, even when he might not take that advice. In closing, I return to what I said about Orrin and what he said in his farewell address. I associate myself with his remarks that we must be friends and not enemies. That is how we can honor Orrin Hatch and keep his spirit within this institution that he cared so much for and devoted much of his life to here, right here in the Senate. Orrin's lifetime of public service helped generations of families in Utah achieve a better quality of life and made America and the United States Senate a better place. Godspeed, my friend. I yield.